Let's be blunt, Margaret. The house is a teardown. The land is worthless. The realtor, a sharp-edged woman in a power suit that screamed "Le top seller," scoffed as she looked at my small, beloved beach cottage. She saw a dusty, worthless old shack occupied by a dusty, worthless old woman. She had no idea that my worthless little plot of land held the one thing in the world that a reclusive local billionaire, a man who had mercilessly bullied her in high school, desperately wanted. And I was about to sell it to him, for a price that would not only make me rich but would also serve up the coldest, most satisfying revenge she had ever seen. This is the story of a woman who was told her home was worthless and decided to sell it for a price that would bankrupt her realtor's ego. If you believe that a home's true value isn't on a spreadsheet, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to witness the most personal real estate transaction in history. The salt-laced wind of Malibu whipped around the corners of my small, sun-bleached cottage, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my life for 50 years. I stood on my porch, looking out at the endless, glittering expanse of the Pacific. This house was not a mansion. It was a humble two-bedroom bungalow, one of the last original homes on a stretch of coastline now dominated by glass and steel monstrosities. It was the house my husband, a high school art teacher, and I had bought when we were young and hopelessly in love, when this stretch of the PCH was a sleepy haven for artists and dreamers, not a playground for billionaires. Every faded shingle, every creaking floorboard, held a memory. But I was 75, my health was failing, and my children, who lived sensible lives in other states, were begging me to sell and move closer to them. The decision to sell was a heartbreak, a quiet surrender to the inevitable march of time. I had called the top real estate agent in the area, a woman named Cynthia Brooks. Her face was plastered on billboards up and down the coast, her smile as sharp and dazzling as the diamonds on her wrist. She arrived in a pristine white Range Rover, her heels sinking into my sandy walkway as she surveyed my property with an expression of undisguised disdain. She didn't compliment the view. She didn't comment on the lovingly tended garden. She walked through the house in 5 minutes, her eyes scanning for flaws. "The foundation is a mess," she declared. "The plumbing is ancient. And the zoning, a nightmare." We sat on my sun-drenched porch, the porch where my husband had painted his last sunset. She opened her sleek, silver laptop and showed me charts and graphs. "Look, Margaret," she'd said, her tone a practiced blend of pity and impatience. "Your neighbors' properties are worth tens of millions. But they have the land, the acreage. You're on a tiny grandfathered plot. You have no privacy. Access is a problem. Let's be blunt. The house is a teardown. The land is worthless." Worthless. She had valued my entire life, my 50 years of memories, at zero. "The best I can do," she'd continued, "is to offer it as a service property to one of the adjacent estates. Maybe a guest house for their staff. We might get a couple $100,000 for it. After my commission, you'll have enough to get a nice little condo somewhere inland." Inland. A death sentence to a woman who had lived her life by the sea. I just looked at her perfectly coiffed hair, her expensive suit, and I felt a flicker of a memory, a high school hallway, a locker, a younger, crueler version of that same face, sneering. "Cindy Brooks," I said, the name tasting like rust in my mouth. Her perfectly made-up eyes widened for a fraction of a second. "Do I know you?" she asked, her voice suddenly cold. "You wouldn't remember me," I said quietly. And in that moment, my quiet surrender transformed into a cold, brilliant, and perfectly targeted act of war. Will this heartless appraisal lead to a shocking karmic reckoning? This story of a hidden history is just getting started. If you're hooked by this story of karma, subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter. Cindy Brooks in high school was the same as Cynthia Brooks, top realtor, just with less expensive shoes. She was the queen bee, the head cheerleader, the beautiful popular girl who ruled the halls of Malibu High with a casual, devastating cruelty. I was Margaret Mouser Miller, the quiet, nerdy girl who loved art and books. Cindy and her clique of mean girls had made my life a living hell. The taunts, the shoves in the hallway, the accidental spills in the cafeteria, it was a relentless campaign of psychological warfare that had left scars I thought had faded long ago. Seeing her on my porch, that same sneer still playing on her lips, brought it all rushing back. She had built her life on the same foundation of casual cruelty, of dismissing and devaluing anyone she deemed beneath her. But there was another character in our little high school drama. A boy named Thomas Thorne. He was even lower on the social ladder than I was. He was a painfully shy, awkward boy who was brilliant at math and computers, but hopeless at social interaction. Cindy and her friends had tormented him mercilessly, calling him Tommy Tuba, because of his size and his place in the school band. I had been kind to him. We were allies, two quiet souls weathering the same storm. We would share our lunches, talk about books. He was my only friend. After graduation, he had disappeared, gone off to Caltech on a full scholarship. I had never heard from him again. Until a few years ago. The name Thomas Thorne was now spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the worlds of tech and finance. He was the legendary reclusive founder of a revolutionary software company, a billionaire many times over. He had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and obsessively private. And I knew from the local papers and my own quiet research that he had recently bought the massive 20-acre estate that bordered my little property on two sides. He had spent a fortune creating a private, impenetrable fortress, a sanctuary from the world that had once been so cruel to him. He was now the most powerful man in Malibu. And he was the boy I had once shared my cookies with, the boy who had been tortured by the very woman who was now trying to tell me my life was worthless. What is this hidden connection that could change everything? I'll think about your offer, I told Cynthia, my voice a mask of polite consideration. You do that, she'd said, already closing her laptop, her mind already on her next, more profitable listing. The moment her Range Rover was a white speck on the PCH, my plan began to form. The conflict was not just about getting a fair price for my home. It was about orchestrating a perfect poetic act of vengeance against a woman who had spent her life making others feel small. The primary obstacle was Thomas Thorne's reclusiveness. He was famously inaccessible, surrounded by a wall of security guards and assistants. I couldn't just call him up. A letter would likely be screened and discarded by a subordinate. I needed a different approach. I needed a signal, a message that only he would understand. I went into my late husband's studio, a dusty paint-splattered room I hadn't touched in years. I found what I was looking for, a large blank canvas and my husband's old oil paints. For the next 2 days, I painted. I didn't paint the ocean. I painted a memory. A scene from our high school library, of a young, awkward boy with thick glasses, and a quiet, dark-haired girl, sitting at a table, a shared copy of The Lord of the Rings open between them. It was a specific, private memory, a moment of quiet friendship in a hostile world. I wasn't a master painter like my husband, but I poured all of my heart, all of my shared history with Thomas, into that canvas. When it was finished, I didn't sign it with my married name. I signed it with my maiden name, Margaret Miller. Then I set the easel up on my front lawn, right by the edge of my property, directly in the line of sight of the security cameras that I knew lined his massive estate. It was a message in a bottle, thrown across a sea of 50 years. Will a secret from the past turn the tables? The ticking clock was Cynthia. I knew she would call back in a few days, her voice impatient, pressuring me to accept the generous offer from the neighboring estate. I had to make contact with Thomas before she could lock me into a deal that would be a victory for her. While I waited, a subplot of delicious irony began to unfold. Cynthia, eager to prove her point about my property's worthlessness, started bad-mouthing it to the other realtors in town. It's a complete teardown, I heard she was saying. A non-conforming lot with no potential. She was actively devaluing her own potential listing, her ego overriding her business sense. Her arrogance was becoming my unwitting ally. The complexity of my plan was its reliance on a 50-year-old memory and the hope that the boy I knew still existed somewhere inside the reclusive billionaire. Had he forgotten me? Had the years of success and isolation hardened him to the point where a sentimental painting would mean nothing? I sat on my porch, watching the painting on the lawn, a strange, hopeful vigil. For 2 days, there was nothing. No black cars pulling up, no men in suits walking down my driveway. My heart began to sink. Maybe I had been a fool. Maybe the past was just the past. But will the next event shock everyone? On the third afternoon, just as I was beginning to lose hope, a golf cart came silently down the long private driveway from the massive estate next door. It stopped at the edge of my property. The man driving it was not a security guard. He was older, with a kind, weathered face that I recognized as Thomas's longtime head of staff, a man I had seen in photos. He got out and walked slowly towards the painting, his eyes squinting in the bright sun. He looked at it for a long, silent minute. Then he looked over at me, sitting on my porch. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, got back in the cart, and drove away. My heart pounded in my chest. It was a response. It was something. An hour later, my old, rarely used landline phone rang. The number was blocked. I answered, my hand trembling. "Is this Margaret Miller?" a voice asked. It was a deep, quiet voice, one I hadn't heard in 5 decades, but one I recognized instantly. It was him. It was Tommy. "Yes, Thomas," I said, my own voice a whisper. There was a long pause. "It's a beautiful painting, Mousie," he said, using the old, cruel nickname with a new, gentle irony. "You got the glasses right." This was the turning point. The connection was made. The bridge across 50 years had been built with a single, shared memory. "I'm selling the house, Tommy," I said, getting straight to the point. "And a very unpleasant woman who I think you might remember from high school told me it was worthless." I heard a low, dry chuckle on the other end of the line. "Cindy Brooks," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "I see she hasn't changed." There was another pause. "Margaret," he said, his voice shifting, becoming all business. "What do you want for it?" I took a deep breath. "I want you to have it, Thomas," I said. "For a price that reflects its true value. To me. And to you." How will this shocking secret change their lives forever? This incredible twist has you hooked? Subscribe now for more stories of delicious karma. My conversation with Thomas set in motion a chain of events that was as swift as it was devastating for Cynthia Brooks. Thomas's lawyers, a team of the most feared real estate attorneys in California, were in touch with me the next morning. The plan we devised was simple, elegant, and ruthless. The immediate consequence was that I was no longer a lone, elderly woman. I was the client of a billionaire. I called Cynthia. "Cynthia," I said, my voice full of a newfound, cheerful confidence. "Good news. I've had another offer on the house. A much better one. I won't be needing your services after all." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with stunned, indignant fury. "Another offer," she sputtered. "From who?" "No one else would touch that property. I have the exclusive listing agreement." "Oh, I don't think you do," I said sweetly. "I never signed anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with my new legal team." I hung up. The repercussions for her were just beginning. She had not only lost a potential commission, she was about to be the subject of the most humiliating real estate story of the year. Will they overcome this new challenge? My growth in this chapter was in my transformation from a passive victim of circumstance to an active, joyful architect of my own vengeance. The challenge was to overcome a lifetime of being Mousie Miller, the quiet, overlooked girl. I was not just selling a house, I was reclaiming my own story, and I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. I worked with Thomas's team to orchestrate the sale. But Thomas had one condition. "I don't want to do this through lawyers, Margaret," he had said on the phone. "I want her to know. I want her to be there." And so, the meeting was set. It would be at the local title company, a neutral ground. It would be me, Cynthia, and a representative from the purchasing entity. Cynthia had been forced to attend as the agent of record, even though she had been fired, a legal formality that was, in itself, a delicious humiliation. She had no idea who the buyer was. She arrived looking like a thundercloud, furious at being cut out of a deal she still assumed was for a paltry sum. My transformation was complete. I walked into that meeting not as a seller, but as a queen holding court. I was no longer the sad, elderly widow. I was a woman with a secret, a woman in a position of absolute, unassailable power. I had overcome my own history of being bullied, and now I was about to help my old friend do the same. But what awaits them in the next confrontation? The conference room at the title company was small and stuffy. Cynthia sat across the table from me, her arms crossed, radiating pure, impotent rage. "I hope you know what you're doing, Margaret," she hissed before the escrow agent arrived. "Selling without a proper agent. You're probably being taken for a ride." I just smiled. "We'll see," I said. The escrow agent, a nervous-looking young man, came in and sat down. "Okay," he began, shuffling his papers. "We're here for the closing on the property at 214 Seafoam Lane. Seller, Margaret Reed. And the buyer is, a Mr. Thomas Thorne." I had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. I watched Cynthia's face. The name registered, but the connection did not. Thomas Thorne? She asked, a flicker of professional greed in her eyes. The Thomas Thorne? She was already calculating the potential for future business, for a connection to the city's biggest whale. The tension was not in a fight. It was in the slow, delicious dawning of a truth she was not yet capable of seeing. The final confrontation will reveal everything, won't it? The door to the conference room opened. A quiet man in a simple, expensive-looking suit walked in. It was Thomas. He was older, of course, his hair gray, but his eyes, behind a pair of minimalist glasses, were the same, quiet, observant, and intensely intelligent. Cynthia's face lit up with a brilliant, predatory smile. She stood up, extending her hand. Mr. Thorne. What a surprise, and an honor. Cynthia Brooks, she purred. If you ever need representation in this area, I am the top agent in Malibu. Thomas did not take her hand. He didn't even look at her. He looked at me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Hello, Margaret, he said, his voice warm. Then, he turned his gaze to Cynthia. His smile vanished. His eyes went cold. Cindy, he said, you haven't changed a bit. The climax was in that single, quiet moment of recognition. I watched the blood drain from Cynthia's face as her brain made the 50-year leap. Tommy Tuba. The shy, awkward, bullied boy from her past was the reclusive, powerful billionaire from her present. And he was standing in this room, buying the worthless house from the one girl who had ever been kind to him. The escrow agent, oblivious, cleared his throat. If we could just get to the final price, he said, looking at a number on the contract. The agreed-upon sale price is $3 million. Cynthia made a small, choking sound. $3 million. For the worthless teardown she had tried to get me to sell for $200,000. $3 million, and the commission, the prestige, the connection, all of it was going to the ghosts of the people she had once tormented. Her humiliation was absolute, silent, and complete. She sank back into her chair, a woman whose entire life of shallow, cruel judgments had just been rendered bankrupt. Cynthia Brooks's career did not survive the story. It was too good, too perfect, too Californian. The tale of the billionaire who bought the worthless house of his childhood friend for millions, just to spite the realtor who had bullied them both in high school, became a legend in the real estate world. Her reputation for arrogance, once seen as a strength, was now a liability. Her clients, especially the new money tech crowd who were terrified of being on the wrong side of a powerful figure like Thomas Thorne, melted away. Thomas did not tear down my house. He restored it, perfectly, meticulously, turning it into a private art studio and guest house. He gave the painting I had made him a place of honor over the fireplace. We became friends again, two quiet souls who had survived the storm and found a peaceful harbor. I used the $3 million to move to a beautiful artists' community in Northern California, where I bought a small house and a large studio. I started painting again, for the first time since my husband had passed. The emotional resolution for me was not in the money, but in the reclaiming of my own history, in the knowledge that a small act of kindness, 50 years ago, had blossomed into a final beautiful act of justice and friendship. A year later, I was having my first gallery show. It was a collection of seascapes, paintings of the Malibu coast as I remembered it. The show sold out on the first night. The final painting, a small, intimate picture of a little bungalow on the beach, was bought by an anonymous collector. The next day, a package arrived. It was the painting, with a simple note. This one belongs with the artist, it read. With thanks, Tommy. Bullying leaves scars that can last a lifetime. But so does kindness. This story is a powerful reminder that the way we treat people matters, and that the past has a funny way of showing up in our present. It's a testament to the idea that true value is not always visible to the naked eye. Have you ever had a moment where a kindness from your past came back to you in an unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. If this story of a friendship that stood the test of time resonated with you, please like and subscribe.